welcome everyone. Like Kim said, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're very excited to have you here. I'm Namita Mehta, the president of the Red Pen. A quick introduction about myself. I've been in the education space for over 20 years. I run the Red Pen with Kim now, but I started off my career as a high school counselor at the B.D. Somani International School. This was when B.D. Somani was a very new school, and I was their first college counselor, and that's where I learned the ropes. Been wearing many hats at the Red Pen, from being a counselor to getting into sales and business development, marketing, and now I head the strategic partnerships at the Red Pen. A bit about the company. We've been around for about 14 years now. In addition to undergraduate admission services, we also provide boarding school services, postgraduate services, and MBA services, and we're really proud of that. I know this evening is all about undergraduate admissions, but we have very specialized teams that support families with applications to global boarding schools, global PG programs, and global MBA programs too. And many of the team members who offer PG, MBA, and boarding school services are here too. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to them. A few stats about us, as you can see on the left-hand side. We are really proud of our results. All our students do really, really well. 99% of our students end up with an admissions offer at the end of the cycle, which we're very, very happy about. Our students have achieved over $150 million in scholarships over the years, which is a large amount. And we work with students across several different majors. So ranging from dance to art to engineering, and today it's all about STEM, but we really work with students who are interested in studying a range of different subjects at university. A few months ago, we entered into a strategic partnership with US News and World Report. This has really been a milestone for us at the Red Pen. We're very, very excited. And through this partnership, we get access to people like Brian and Amy, who are here today. They will introduce themselves. But US News has a very important ranking that we all use when we're thinking about colleges and college lists. So there was a lot of synergy, and they looked at the work that we are doing in India with Indian families, and we are their first partners in India, which we're very excited about. And their insights, through this partnership, we also get access to a lot of proprietary data from colleges, and that really helps us help you better. So I just wanted to say that. Okay, back to the session. I know many of you have so many questions. It's uncertain times. Where should I send my child after grade 12? What's happening in the US and Canada, Southeast Asia? And I totally relate, because I have a 9th grader at home too. And we're having these conversations on the dining table, and there's so much confusion. Even I don't know the answer. So we have some experts here today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So let's start with Brian Mitchell. He's the general manager of US News and World Report and the founder of collegeadvisor.com.
Thank you so much, Namita. And thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. I'm so excited to be here in India for my first trip, but certainly not my last. I have been extremely energized this week, and getting to meet many of you earlier before the talk has just made me even more excited to share some of our insights tonight. So I joined US News and World Report about 3 years ago by way of an acquisition of a company that I founded in the US called collegeadvisor.com. It's one of the largest US-based admissions consultancies. Started it about 6 years ago. We've helped over 10,000 families, mostly with a focus in the US applying to elite universities. And we've also helped families in 70 countries around the world achieve acceptances. My journey in admissions started from a personal note. So like many of you, I come from a family that understands the extreme importance of education and the role that it plays in developing students into leaders and citizens. My grandpa was actually a founding member of NASA and attended Harvard and was in John F. Kennedy's class. So when I was a young child, my last name is Mitchell. Kennedy, K and M are quite close in the alphabet. So I'd go through his yearbook and see, my grandpa next to JFK, and it inspired me so much. My goal from a very young age, I had my sights set on Harvard. And like many of you, I took advantage of every opportunity to try to give myself the best chance. Ultimately, I was accepted into Harvard, achieved a perfect score on my SAT, I also received full merit scholarships to University of Virginia, which is called the Jefferson Scholarship, as well as Vanderbilt University on the Cornelius Vanderbilt Scholarship. Probably to many of your surprise, I chose not to go to Harvard, which was tough, giving up that personal dream, and ended up going to UVA at an amazing time at the McIntire School of Commerce, studied finance and business analytics. But my passion was definitely for entrepreneurship, which I launched into with collegeadvisor.com. A couple of years ago, as we were starting to look internationally to broaden the scope of College Advisor and US News, we saw this amazing and growing market in India and wanted to find a strategic partner on the ground. And we wanted to find a partner that had the market leadership, the credibility, the amazing success stories that Namita highlighted, and also great people, right? Strong convictions, ethics, and we found all of that, and it became a no-brainer to partner with the Red Pen. So Amy and I are tremendously excited to be here, and excited to not only share some of our insights about these changing times, but provide some real data, as well as answer many of your questions. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Brian. So let's move on to Dr. Amy Clines. She's the former Senior Assistant Director of Admissions at the Georgia Institute of Technology that, we all say Georgia Tech.
Yes, thank you. So do we. So yes, and like Brian, this is my first time in India as well. And I just have to say, I'm having a phenomenal experience and just an absolutely lovely place that hopefully I'll be able to return to. But yeah, so as mentioned, I have been in college admissions for 26 years. I've worked at 8 different institutions, including Georgia Tech. And while I was at Georgia Tech, I read international applications. So I read thousands and thousands and thousands of applications while at Georgia Tech, but then have also throughout my career at these other institutions. And really what I'm hoping to provide to you tonight is really kind of an inside perspective of what that reader is seeing when you apply. You guys are going to put in a lot of work in those college applications, and you're doing a lot of work to be able to do that, to tell your story. And so I'm hoping that I can share that with you tonight and give you an idea of what's going to help you stand out, maybe avoid some things here or there, so that you can really get in front of that application reviewer and be known and be seen, and hopefully be able to get in and attend your dream school.
Thank you so much, Amy. Now, my business partner, the one and only Dr. Kim Dixit.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I am Kim Dixit, CEO and co-founder of the Red Pen. So I started, I came to Mumbai almost 20 years ago, and I started the Red Pen with a co-founder in 2011, so almost 14 years now. And we, we saw a need in the market. We felt like, it was a very different time from now, to be very honest. It was very different. But it was something, we felt really inspired by a lot of the students that we met, young people we met who were applying for undergraduate, MBA, different programs across the world. Actually, at the time, we were very focused on the US, and we were very focused on essays, hence the name The Red Pen, which works on essays. But quickly, we have morphed into a company that helps students, apply everywhere in the world, understand different geographies, understand the benefits of, different academic choices along the way. And also in 2015, as you could, 2015? Namita joined us after her stint at the B.D. Somani School, and has really, really enhanced our offerings with her vast knowledge around all kinds of things, including UK landscape, boarding schools, and particularly the Oxbridge process. So it's been a really great journey. Now we are a company that, like I said, help students access academic options across the world. Our counselors are living all over the world, mostly in India, but all over the world. And our students that we support are also all over the world. But we are based in Mumbai, and that's something we're excited about, going to our Mumbai office all the time and meeting our team, and building that kind of culture that is all about, supporting students to get to the place that sort of excites them. And I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is that there's just a lot of variability in that. Everyone talks about, some of the same colleges and they talk about, a lot of the same colleges, a lot of the great success stories, but there are kids doing everything. And I think that's super exciting. And that's something that, growing this business and being where we are at this time, which is very exciting in terms of global student mobility, is a really, is really fun and exciting for us. So I'm really happy to be here today. And I think, I'm excited to have our partners here with us to talk more about the U.S. options, but any questions anyone has about other parts of the world, we're also here.
Perfect. So just to give you a bit of a understanding of the rest of this evening, we have a few questions prepared. We've carefully curated them from some of the families that we're working with and our team. So I'm sure many of your questions will get answered, but there will be a Q&A at the end. So in case I haven't covered something, or if you have a burning question, you're welcome to ask those at the end, okay? So let's get started with the international landscape. Brian, this is for you. How is the landscape for education in the US changing for international students? Just address the elephant in the room.
So first, as we know, we have a very active and opinionated administration in the United States right now. Tonight, I will not be representing that administration, nor do I intend to, but I want to help unpack some of these headlines and go beyond them, right? Many of you have questions, and it seems like every day we're waking up to a new change. I can tell you, even participating in conferences for the last few weeks with top experts and university presidents and deans, they themselves are living in uncertain times, waking up to new news every single day and working with their legal teams on battling this administration more so than they're actually working with their own faculty in some ways. So let's go one layer below and actually look at some of the data. The reality is, we are seeing some stymieing effects from the administration in terms of international enrollment. After many years of growth from international enrollments and enrollment from India and applications from India, we are seeing data come out this year that in fall 2025, the fall 2025 season, about a 17% drop in terms of the total landscape across undergrad and grad for international enrollments in U.S. universities. Let's double click into specifically the undergraduate process. We have looked at data from what's called the Common application, or you're going to hear it as Common App. They provide excellent data, both in terms of like full year reports of their applicants, but also mid-year reports that I'll cite. So one report just came out and reflected the applicant data through November 1st of the current cycle. And what they found is a minus 9% drop in total international applications through November 1st, as well as a minus 14% drop in terms of applications from India. This was in contrast to the last year's full cycle that saw a positive 2% growth from Indian applicants, as well as several years of continued growth from India. In many ways, for the last 5 years, India has actually provided a variety of enrollments that have Indian applicants have taken the place of many Chinese applicants, which has seen systemic decline from China in applications to the US since COVID. Going a little bit deeper, we know that universities are not taking these executive decrees lying down. And again, I'm coming off the back of meeting with many of these deans directly and hearing from them just how passionate their universities are and education associations are, as well as the American public is, in protecting what is an incredibly valuable part of the American education system, which is our international students. In 1 year alone, in 2024 to 2025, Indian students in the U.S. Provided $43 billion worth of economic value to the U.S. economy. And universities, as well as the American public and employers, understand this. International applicants are incredibly important to the financial as well as the talent lifeblood of universities as well as employers in the US. And we are going through a massive industrial revolution with AI that needs talented STEM students from all parts of the world in ways that we can't fill just from Americans. I think that we're starting to see many things stabilize, in particular, many of the visa delays. There's, again, a lot of push from universities and educational associations to have consulates start clearing those backlogs. And I think that we'll continue to see this pushback be effective because ultimately, again, employers and universities heavily rely on international families to fulfill both their financial and tuition goals. That being said, families are responding to this by diversifying their set of applications. They're not just applying to the US. They're not just applying to the quote, big four. They're starting to look at other options. That being said, I think that the value of the American education system still is quite differentiated relative to many other countries in providing this like broad-based educational platform, still incredible internship and career opportunities, a very fast-growing economic market in the US. And I believe that we will continue to fight back against many of these executive decrees that frankly are not being approved by Congress, and frankly that the American public largely does not agree with. In fact, recent surveys that I've reviewed has shown that more than 80% of the American public believes that international students are extremely critical to our goals. So go beyond the headlines, go beyond just what the administration is saying, and really understand that the international enrollments will continue to drive much of the economic and talent goals of U.S. employers and universities.
Thanks, Brian, just for setting the context and giving us some data. Let's just move to Kim now. Like from a counselor's perspective, how are your recommendations and strategies changing in light of these shifting landscapes and even the competitiveness of these U.S. colleges?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting question, because I think a lot of people see these headlines and they think, what does this mean for me, right? It may mean a lot for, the American public or the Indian, sort of education landscape. But for me as an applicant, as a parent, what should I do? How should I think about this? So I think one of the main things that I really like to kind of put out there, and Brian kind of got to the heart of this, is that nothing has really changed. Like student visas are still available. U.S. universities are still enrolling students, and they're very excited, and they want and they're welcoming to international students. So that hasn't changed. The campus environments are still as they were. They're being somewhat affected, but Brian said, there's a lot of orders that are coming out that are going through courts, and things are changing, but slowly, and we don't know how, and it's not necessarily affecting student experience so much. So that's one of the first things that I try to kind of reassure people, that the U.S. college experience is essentially, for most intents and purposes, not unchanged. So that's one point. In terms of how to advise families now, I think we've all discussed that, we definitely ask, we encourage families to kind of consider another geography option. And that is something that we're seeing people come to us with that idea already. We do see there is a drop in the number of families that come to us now and only want to look at the US. So we do see people adding, one other country at least to the kind of mix, just to kind of have some options in case something changes dramatically. And I think as a team, as an organization, we are really, upgrading our knowledge every day. Honestly, today there was a session on education in Hungary. So I'm looking at my a colleague over there to kind of verify this. But Hungary, different, the places all over the world. There's education all over the world. There's education in English all over the world. And we're really trying to bring those opportunities also to our students. And I think the other thing that we're seeing a lot of, which won't surprise anyone probably, is that a lot of students, much more than when we started doing counseling, a lot of students are just willing to stay in India right now. And India is really offering great options when it comes to the newer liberal arts or liberal arts and sciences colleges. And those are great opportunities. People feel comfortable, taking those on. Those often also include a lot of interesting things like study abroad. So you're not really just sitting in India for those 3 years, 3 or 4 years, depending. So there's a lot happening in the Indian education landscape that I think is also really giving us things to talk about in these conversations.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a couple of data points, Kim, that you said, when Indian families are looking at higher education opportunities, we always did look at like 1 or 2 destinations, right? I mean, a data point from the Red Pen is pre-COVID, on average, families that worked with us from India would look at 2 destinations. So it would be US or Canada, or UK or Europe, or Hong Kong and Canada. We typically help students with 2 geographies at one time. And this changed after COVID to about 3.2. So among the 500 students that we work with annually, families were looking at more than 3 destinations on average. And given the current scenario, it's also, it's more than that now. And sometimes more, sometimes less, but we understand that. And I think that is one of the Red Pen's superpowers, right? I mean, we really take time and effort to find out what is happening in the world. Kim mentioned Hungary, but we're also seeing interest in places like Japan and South Korea. And, our teams are up to speed and up to date with what is happening globally. But let's come back to the US. And I'm going to ask you a question, Amy. I think, what has surprised you most about the applicants, particularly the Indian applicants, in a positive way?
So, my first experience really digging into applicants from India was while I was at Georgia Tech. And the top 3 countries that they received applicants from at the time were China, India, and South Korea. And I remember, not really having any knowledge, any background, any experience with that, and coming into it. And so many of the students that I would evaluate, and even students that I work with now, just there's this sincere interest in doing more and doing better. It's not necessarily, it can be driven by parents, but in my experience, it comes through from the student that they are so driven to move forward and willing to work for it, quite frankly. I've also read thousands of domestic applications in my time in admissions. And there can definitely be, in both cases, those students that just stand out. But more so than not, my experience with reading students that applied from India was just, and the sheer willingness to come so far away from home to do amazing things on the campus where I worked. So, I would say it's been fascinating to be able to share, read those stories and be part of those experiences along with the students that have applied. So,
and I think just to add to that, there are some major differences, though, in the American universities relative to other countries. And I think it's important to understand those differences and to capitalize on that as you're building out your extracurricular profile, for example, or understanding what types of schools are going to be the right fit. We'll talk a little bit later about the rankings, but I have found that many of our international families are even more keen on using those rankings as their guide to applications. And I certainly, as the individual on the stage here representing those rankings, believe in their value, but encourage families, especially as they're building out that middle of the list, right? To look beyond just your classic top 20 overall rankings and really look for schools that might over-index in particular programs. Look for communities that are vibrant in terms of their alumni networks and employer connections. Look for a place where your student is going to thrive. At the end of the day, you could go to a top school and not be as successful, and that is sort of missing the whole point of the education system, which is to enjoy those 4 years, to develop yourself in those 4 years, to understand how that's going to give you a platform for that next step in education. Many of our students go on to grad school or MBA, but also those career connections. So I think my advice is just going that one layer beyond just the prestige and also understanding fit, especially as you're building out those likely or middle bracket of your college lists.
That's actually a perfect segue to the next question, Brian. I mean, it's on college rankings. How do you advise students and families to use these college rankings in the college admissions process?
Perfect. So let me just build on my prior answer. So let's take a little history lesson here. Let's go back in time. So the U.S. News launched its inaugural college rankings in 1983. We were the first group that wanted to provide more transparency and real data to these thousands of institutions in the U.S. that prior to us doing this almost existed and capitalized on this kind of being like a black box, right? If I don't have to report my data, then I'm not necessarily accountable to student outcomes, to ROI, to graduation rates. So since 1983, we've obviously become extremely famous or infamous, depending on who's asking, for our overall national rankings. That is what most people understand. They know that, for example, Princeton is the #1 US News ranked school for undergrad overall in the last 2 years. They know, for example, that Harvard ranks as one of the top global universities. But what I think families need to understand too is that we don't just do an overall ranking. We actually provide a variety of rankings across graduate programs. And then even within undergraduate, we have a variety of sub-rankings. So we have our overall national university rankings that you all are very familiar with. We have national liberal arts college rankings. So amazing institutions like Williams or Amherst or Pomona or others that are also achieving amazing student outcomes and placement rates. We also have subcategory rankings for regional universities and regional colleges across 4 different regions in the United States. And even further, you can double click into schools that rank very highly for particular programs across STEM, schools that rank very highly in terms of value or ROI. So going back to my earlier answer, it's okay to start with that first overall ranking as a launching off point. But especially as you go into that college list building process, do yourself a favor and don't only use that as your measuring stick. Because guess what? The top 25 universities in the United States have less than 10% acceptance rates. In fact, many of them have less than 5% acceptance rates. These institutions could fill their incoming class 3 to 5 times over with students who are valedictorians or in the top 1% of their high school class. So while many of those institutions can be your dream, your ambition, just as getting into Harvard was my ambition, use my own story as a guide. I ended up not going to the classic top-ranked school, still went to a very good school in University of Virginia, but had an amazing experience where I was able to thrive and, in fact, perhaps earn some opportunities that would have been harder to come by at a quote-unquote extremely prestigious school like an Ivy League. The phrase I'm going to leave you with is, at many of these top institutions, because the students are so competitive, so talented, just as your children are, just as many of you all are addressing the students directly, it is going to then feel like you just did this whole competition to get into the school, and then it's a competition when you get to the school. I've heard this from many of our clients that they feel like they hit the lottery by getting in, and then they get there, and now I have to compete to get into a club. I have to compete with the most talented students across the world to get an internship. I have to compete with those students to get the job. And for this reason, it can then feel like you're a small fish in a big pond. Whereas, as you look at still very strong tier 1 institutions in the US that provide these amazing learning experiences and opportunities, but are just maybe one layer below those top 10 or 20 schools, you could be a big fish in a smaller pond and take advantage of those opportunities first and be kind of be that first student that professor thinks about or that employer is interviewing. So it's a balance. We ultimately recommend creating a list of at least 8 to 12 US institutions, especially if you're looking at the most highly competitive ones. And we actually see that every single year, especially since COVID and test optional policies, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that students are adding more schools to their list. So I think the rankings are a very useful starting off point, but make sure to double click into many of those subcategory rankings and look for schools that beyond just the prestige factor that can offer an excellent opportunity to stand out.
Thanks, Brian. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think we keep preaching at the Red Pen that it's all about best fit, and again, best fit. Thanks for articulating that so well. So let's move into the actual applications. I have a question for you, Amy. This is especially for the STEM folk out here. 50% of applications from India are STEM. Oftentimes, students in high school wonder, should I apply for engineering or should I apply for a pure science degree? If you can just kind of talk a little bit about that and also a little bit about, this is a question, is it easier to get into engineering or if I apply to physics?
Yeah.
If you can just give us some light on that.
Sure. Yeah. So, and it's tough. I mean, that's a tough question. And there's no, kind of right or wrong to it. It's really kind of how you enter into your thought process with how you're applying and what you're pursuing. What is your ultimate goal? I mean, a lot of times students will come up, well, I'm good in math, I'm good in science, I'm going to do engineering. Well, there's lots of other things to do. I mean, engineering, I think, is something that's, it's easy to understand. People know, generally what it is. Lots of, prominent institutions have engineering. But I would say, we were speaking about this the other day, and I would, say to the student, kind of sit back and think, okay, thinking forward, what is it that you really enjoy about those math and science classes? What is it about engineering that you think you want to do with engineering? Are you more hands-on, more practical? Are you more theoretical? What do you enjoy more? Because that's really going to help guide where you go. In terms of ease getting into, again, that varies institution by institution in terms of how they're going to admit a student. And sometimes it can be because the previous year they had a ton of students that came in one particular major or one particular college, and now they need to balance it out. But that could change the following year. So it's one of those things you just really have to, either keep on top of yourself or lean into, folks from like the Red Pen or College Advisor to kind of help, keep track of what those trends look like and reaching out to those admission counselors there. But, again, I would say, don't fall into that. Well, this is just an easy fit for what I like. Really think deeply about what you want to do and how you can see yourself utilizing that degree moving forward, and what kind of options do you want open to you. And I think we've also talked about too, a lot of times you're interested in STEM, your last degree is not going to be your bachelor's degree, right? So you've got opportunities, if you do decide to go into more on the science side of things, you could pursue engineering, in a graduate program or some other way. I mean, there's lots of ways to get to the same end goal. And so I think just keeping that in mind as well. It's, don't lock yourself in too soon, explore those options and know that there's even beyond the undergrad opportunity to pursue.
Yeah, I just want to add to that because I feel like, for myself coming, from the U.S. to India, and hearing what families were telling me, I was always confused by this question. I was like, why is this? If you like chemistry, then do chemistry and don't do engineering. But I think in India, especially in what a generation before, my understanding is that there's such a sort of, there's a prestige and a bit of a, on engineering, and also the idea that, if you are doing engineering, you get a job, and that prepares you even for finance and all these other jobs. And it's true. It's not untrue. But I think what we've seen is exactly what we hear all the time is that, 10 years from now, we don't know what the jobs are going to be. So now we look at students who are graduating from good colleges with science degrees. And I think there was a time when people thought, what do you do with science? I mean, I've had parents, what do you do with science? I've had parents ask me that. So, I had to come up with answers. But now we see students who get, who pursue a degree in chemistry, but they also, are part of this is just an example that's coming to my mind. So I'll say it, like University of Chicago does not have an undergraduate business major, but they have like kind of a selective program you can join with Booth, and it's sort of a certificate or something, but it's not a major. And she did that along with her chemistry degree, and she's now doing consulting in healthcare fields, right? So she understands the science, or maybe it's healthcare and pharma, I don't remember. But anyway, that is a job that, when she was finishing high school, no one could have ever explained that, and she would have said, yeah, I totally want to do that. Like no one would have, really been able to kind of, map that out, right? So you have to understand that the U.S. education system also gives you a lot of these kinds of opportunities where there's so many colleges out there that are just so interdisciplinary, and that's their thing. They're like, a parent will come to me and say, well, is it good in this? I'm like, well, it's good in this and it's good in this, but it's really good in interdisciplinary fields. And it's really good for students who don't want to pick one thing. It's great for students who want to, put things together. I remember meeting the admissions officer of Northwestern University, and Northwestern has this motto, which is like, "And is in our DNA," they say. I think some other college also says that. But anyway, that I remember seeing that. And I asked her, would a student who's just like, and this is Northwestern, which is in Chicago, right? So you have a University of Chicago on the other side. So I said, a student who's really interested in economics, would that be, in that just pure economics theory, like, classical economics, is this the place for them? She goes, they could probably get through, but that wouldn't be very interesting path for them in our university, because we want students who are going to do two things or more, right? Whereas, and I did not ask this question of University of Chicago, but my assumption is like, that's a much more classical economics degree. So I'm just saying that you really need to find the one that fits you. And as I'm talking about these two examples, these are both incredible universities. You cannot say one is better than the other. It's only better for that student who either wants the interdisciplinary experience or doesn't, right? That is a very relative choice. So I think these are the kinds of things that, you have to keep in mind when it comes to asking a question like, should I do, STEM, or should I do should I do engineering, or should I do science? Like, it's such a tricky question. And there's so many answers behind that.
Right.
No, thanks, Kim. I think you've, explained. I think a lot of this also means that we have to understand the education system in the US. It's very different from what we're used to in India, where you're supposed to study these subjects or those subjects. Even in the Indian curriculum, you're kind of honed into like commerce, science, or arts, right? And in the US, it's so different. You can kind of dabble in everything and study that. But just to go back to the question, I think, Brian, you and I were chatting about this in the car on the way here, about how sometimes just in terms of just the reality and, how much time do we have to do everything? You and I were just talking about, have you actually built anything with Adreno or not? Or are you just a theoretical person who loves studying math? So do you want to talk a little bit about that and related in kind of thinking about what you want to major in?
Absolutely. I mean, the reality is the extracurricular profile is so important to American universities, especially the elite ones. As we said earlier, these schools could fill their class 3 to 5 times over with valedictorians. So we're all logical people here. What does that mean? Well, then having a perfect academic track record is just one foot in the door. It doesn't fully get you in. You have to be able to differentiate yourself. And this is where it comes down to those more qualitative aspects of the application process. And so if you are going to be, applying for the computer science or more applied math or computer engineering or mechanical engineering, and you don't have any hands-on projects, hands-on experience, you haven't built something of your own or done a project outside of school, then look, it's not going to come across as compelling to that admissions officer as a student who has. Conversely, if you're applying to a hard science and you haven't maximized the academics at your school available in math and sciences and gotten great scores in those areas and maybe self-studied for some additional exams to further demonstrate that, or used every academic resource available to you to showcase your academic chops, that won't stand out as much. So based on your intended major at that university, that should dictate how you're presenting or packaging what you've done inside and outside of school. And understand that I don't have to apply to every institution with the same major. There might be a really excellent program at one school that I'm interested in. I think the example that I'll use here is that we study the average salary like 6 years after graduation as one of the data points that informs our rankings. And many people in the crowd might not know that at Ivy League institutions, some of the highest paid graduates 6 years after studied philosophy. This should help reinforce the point that the major that you do in undergrad doesn't necessarily dictate your career outcomes, especially in the context of a majority of students ending up going to additional school beyond, and understanding the fact that there's a high importance on not just what I'm studying in the classroom, in my major, and the content, but what I'm doing outside the classroom. What are the extracurriculars I'm getting involved in at college? What are the internships that I'm doing in my summers? I've had many friends who have entered technical fields working for top tech companies that did not study engineering in university.
Thanks, Brian. I mean, I think this is a great segue into the next question for both of you, Kim and Amy. You spoke a lot about extracurricular activities, and we know that in the US, they use something called holistic admissions, where they review you by looking at a range of different things. So, at the Red Pen, we see data, talent, and voice, your grades, your extracurriculars, your letters of recommendations, your essays. But what really is the most important part of this application process? Is it different for STEM and non-STEM students?
And I think Brian mentioned this before. I mean, the academics are expected, and I will say, and fair or not fair, for international applicants from India is 100% expected to be highly academically motivated and have great grades, great rigor, and great test scores. So really, getting to that point and then being reviewed holistically, we're looking for someone who stood out. And I think that comes from what we were mentioning about those activities, those non-classroom type of things that you're involved in. But more importantly, how you're experiencing them and what you're taking from them to then give back or put back in some way, whether it's in your community, at your school, in your future career plans, or things that you want to do at that school. And it ties in too with being authentic about the schools you're applying to. It's very evident. It can be very evident when you apply through your essays or through kind of, just the whole picture coming together. If you're really interested in that university, or if you're just interested in the name, or that ranking or something like that. The students who dig a little deeper find out what exactly at that institution are you interested in? Is it working in a particular lab? Is it being able to have access to certain research or resources? Is it because of the location that allows you to work with these different Fortune 500 companies? Like, what is it in particular that's going to draw you to that institution? Because just as you want to be seen as an individual when you apply, institutions want to be, recognized as individual and contributing in very special ways. And so putting together that narrative through your essays, through all the selection of the extracurricular that you've taken, and then your thoughtful academic career, making sure you're taking those classes that align with what you're passionate about, what you're good in, and what you want to pursue, really do all come together nicely for a holistic review.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to say something which actually I've heard Amy say for the last 2 days, but she didn't say it right now, which is the admissions reader looks at an application for 6 minutes, right? So
or less.
or less. So this whole all the points she made about the things that draw the application together and the choices that you make. I mean, those take years, and the essays take months, weeks. I mean, I don't know. It just all takes a long time. But remember that you have to put it into this very coherent and impactful narrative that somebody can get in 6 minutes. So this is what I think, when people say, and we always we still say it, but we're fond of saying, you don't need to tick a bunch of boxes to get into a great college. That is not the thing. And then so people are like, hey, do not tick boxes, but what do you do? So, right. I mean, that's not you have to give something on the other side. So then the thing that I always say is like, whatever, you can tick whatever boxes you want, but the point of those boxes is really to build this narrative that can be kind of captured in 6 minutes, right? That's so important. And I wanted to just say this because sometimes when we talk about, admissions decisions and what stands out and all this stuff. So first point is that, there's a 6 minute thing. And like she said, sometimes less. If I'm now taking your
okay.
It's all coming from her that I learned this yesterday. But when if you look at an application that the academics are not strong enough, you don't even take 6 minutes, right? It's not that you stop there, but you're reading the essays a little bit faster. You're going through everything else a little bit faster. So that's the other point to make. Like, it's not that, because I think there's a whole concept of like threshold admissions, which was what we consider to be the opposite of holistic admissions, right? So threshold-based admissions means you will just like get spit out if you're not meeting a certain academic criteria. And in the UK, there's very threshold-based admissions. You have to have a particular predicted grade to even be considered to apply. So that doesn't typically happen in the US when holistic admissions are being used. So they'll still read the whole thing, even if you don't meet the threshold, so to speak. But the other thing to understand is that the first read is often, almost always, with two people. So two people, and the readers that read the first pass, that team of two sitting together, are typically seasonal readers. They're not people who are, kind of full-time, always with the university, and have also maybe, like you said, also maybe not attended this university, have gone through a training program, of course, of how to evaluate the application. But this first set of readers is looking for specific things that they've been trained to look for. They may have only do it once with this season in this college, and the next year they'll move on to something else. So I'm just saying that you got to remember those first readers are not usually the strongest. Maybe, is that fair to say?
Could be, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's different, each institution.
Yeah.
But.
So anyway, when you're thinking of that, then you also have to remember that quick read has to tell them a lot that they may not already know. And then what happens is that group of two people decides if you're moving ahead. It's never the case. Things change, but it's never the case that one person rejects you. That you get, one person sees your application and says, not going to work. It's usually two people have to agree. And if that group of two doesn't agree, then it usually goes to the next level for the next person to decide. But just giving you a little bit of context of what it is we're talking about when we're talking about the review of the application, that it takes 6 minutes and what stands out and all that. So, the readers are looking at files and then kind of moving them to a next level and a next level left. And it just kind of like narrows and narrows and narrows. So that's kind of how it works.
Well, and to add to that, because I remember too something I said the other day, is that, I worked at Georgia Tech. I did not attend Georgia Tech, and I did not major in engineering or anything STEM related. I have a business degree. And so sitting there reading applications and reading essays about technical things and things way beyond my comprehension. All that to say is that, how you present yourself is also very important in terms of know your audience. You're not writing these essays, at least in the US, at most institutions, faculty or your primary researchers are not reading those essays. They're sometimes 22, 23-year-old students. This is their first job out of college, or they're new, in this realm, or they're more seasoned. Certainly, it's the whole gamut. But just know that it's a human being at the end of the day, reading that application and reviewing that, and having to do all these things in a very condensed amount of time, and just to give some context about that 6 minutes, because it could be different. But typically, what it was, you have a set number of applications that come in, right? Then you have so many weeks in which those decisions can be made, because you have to release decisions on a certain date or there will be mayhem. And so then you work back from that. How many people do you have to read? How many days in the week? How many hours does that boil down to? And then how many applications in an hour to reach your goal for the week? And then that's how many minutes you spend on an application on average. So it's a little bit of science behind that, just to make sure that you're reaching those goals at the end of the day.
Just to belabor this point, understand the human being on the other side. Effective communication comes down to understanding your audience. Truly, as you're going through and reading your own essays or discussing with your parents or your faculty, your teacher at your school, or working, with us and your private consultant, take it to the extreme. Think about that reader who's on their 98th application that day at the end of a 10-hour shift, right? And understand that you need to be able to reach across the aisle and create that advocate. You're ultimately trying to create a connection and resonate with that individual so that they decide to go to bat for you in admissions committee, so that they decide to fight for you against all the other admissions officers who are going to come with the list of their students that they love. So if you have a meandering and still robust, but this kind of not cohesive application where you're trying to write about everything that you've done in your essays and it becomes all about the what and not about the why, it's not going to connect with the reader as much as the student who's able to showcase something about their personality, something about their character that leaves a mark, that creates a connection. Again, all of this comes from all of this comes after first getting your foot in the door with your academic strengths and your scores, etc. But after that, you have to be able to create a genuine connection with that reader.
Yeah, no, I think all three of you answered that question really well. I completely agree with you. I mean, so I've obviously been a counselor for so many years, and I've worked with families who are, want to continue to take the SAT just to get an extra 20 points. When you're like, no, I don't think a 1540 or a 1560 is going to make a difference. It's the essays and the connection. So thank you, Brian, Amy, and Kim for just kind of highlighting that. But let's go back to test scores, because look, that's important. There's been a world of test optional, test blind, and now many colleges are asking for the SAT, APs again. So Brian, if you could just talk a little bit about how important are these SATs and APs for international students applying to U.S. colleges? And then Amy, maybe you can add on. Thanks.
Right. So obviously everyone knows that after COVID, because many of the testing centers were closed, more schools went and adopted test optional policies. There was already a few that did, but the vast majority shifted to test optional. In addition to that, we saw the University of California system, which is the largest public university system, contains an amazing set of colleges. Many of you know UCLA, UC Berkeley, but also many of other good UCs that we can talk about. They actually became test blind. They won't even consider a test score in the application process. What we're seeing now is a lot of research come out of especially top institutions in the Ivy League that have studied the correlation between the SAT or ACT score and then the success at that institution in terms of how those students do. And they've actually found, these are the best researchers in the world, they've found a strong predictive connection. This has led many of these institutions to return to requiring a standardized test. So over the last few years, we've seen Harvard, Yale, Brown, Dartmouth, Cornell just announced that they're returning. So that's 5 out of the 8 Ivies. We've also seen in 2022, MIT return to requiring the SAT or ACT. Caltech, Georgia Tech never went away from requiring it. In fact, the entire public university system in Georgia and Florida have stuck to requiring it. Even though you're going to see headlines about many schools at the top returning to requiring the SAT or ACT, we still have some data from the Common App that only represents about 5% of all 1,100 member institutions that have returned. So it's more so at that top end that really want to make sure that the students that they're admitting can be successful at these what are objectively pretty intense academic institutions. We also have to understand that just because a school's test optional doesn't necessarily mean that students aren't submitting the score. So this is why we at the Red Pen and College Advisor do recommend at least sitting for the SAT once. And we find that the average applicant who submits their score, will take the test more than once because it can only be an advantage to you, right? If you don't get a great score, you don't have to submit it to that institution if it's test optional. If you do get a great score, then it becomes another piece of evidence to further accentuate your application and demonstrate your academic strengths. In fact, we have some interesting data from Harvard that in the year prior to them reinstating their requirements, this would be the class of 2028, 75% of Harvard's admitted students that year, even when they were test optional, had submitted a score. So always kind of looking beyond just the moniker of test optional and understanding that you may be putting yourself at a slight disadvantage, or at least making it such that the other aspects of your application will have to be that much better if you don't also have a strong test score. The phrase I used in yesterday's talk in Bangalore was that admissions officers are like detectives. They're going to use all the evidence possible to make a determination on an applicant. So if you're not submitting that key piece of evidence, well, then what am I going to do as a detective? I'm going to rely on all that other evidence, the other aspects of the application, such as the essays and extracurriculars and LORs and honors or awards. I'm going to need to see that those components are that much better to help offset this lack of a key data point that I have in a test score.
Yeah, and I think, again, it varies by institution, and there's certainly trends, that we can monitor, but you really never know. I mean, things are changing so quickly. But again, it doesn't if you've got them, it doesn't hurt you most of the time to submit them. Again, you're looking at the policies for the institutions. AP scores typically are not required for admission. I mean, certainly if you have scores and they're high, at 4 or 5, put them on there. Again, they're just going to be something else in your portfolio that will add to your, your admissibility, or add to kind of your overall package that they're looking for. So.
Okay, I'm going to move to a new theme, which is AI in the college admissions process. I'm going to start with you, Amy. Do you anticipate a shift in how applications will be reviewed as AI becomes more prevalent?
Sure. So, I mean, there's already some evidence out there of this happening. I think Virginia Tech and UNC are using some AI in the kind of the front line of their admissions review in terms of maybe scoring essays or some other components. But I think, Brian can speak more to this about, deans that he's been speaking to as well. Like, there's not an overwhelming or kind of, general adoption of this yet. And at the end of the day, I find it really hard to imagine how the process can be, really replaced ultimately by AI. Certainly, I think there's room for it to come in to help, just as it can help students applying to, institutions, not using it to replace your work on the application or on the essays or anything like that, but certainly as something that kind of enhance that experience. Because as we talked about, there's just so many applications, and there's only so many people and so much time to do those things. So I feel that there's going to be continued exploration in that area, and how they can use that to enhance kind of, that more of that frontline first review, initial kind of like getting people, narrowing down that funnel a little bit, and then focusing in with those humans on that other part of it. Did you want to add to that at all? Is there another question?
The human aspect of this process is not going to go away. We've heard that very clearly from deans. I think, again, AI will start to be used more, as Amy said, at that front layer, perhaps to review the more mechanical aspects of the essays, so that the admissions officers who are so time-stricken can have more time to dive into the content. But again, this just reinforces the point of being able to make the human connection. I can predict Namitha's next question. I'll just jump to it, which is, let's consider the reverse in terms of how you all as families are using AI increasingly in the admissions process, and how it can be used as a helpful tool. So last week on Monday, I've had a busy last 2 weeks. I was in Washington, D.C. giving a presentation to chief marketing officers and deans of admission and enrollment at a variety of institutions across the U.S. At an event called the American Marketing Association for Higher Ed. And I gave a presentation on a proprietary survey that we did at US News of about 1,500 undergrad and grad applicants from around the world to US institutions. And what we found is certainly there is an increasing use of AI at that front door, that exploratory aspect, that the research and comparison parts of the application process. So we saw that AI is now, including tools like ChatGPT and others, are now becoming increasingly popular. We also saw a major drop in, we ran the same survey 2 years in a row. We saw a major drop in just the single reliance on like Google in college sites for that information. We saw a drop in the use of YouTube, and AI tools like ChatGPT are stepping in. I think OpenAI just released that they're now at 800 million weekly active users, which is truly shocking levels of growth. Understand that families and students, and many of you can confirm this, are quite skeptical of those initial answers that they're getting from AI, and are also using human sources and those official college sites, as well as the US News profile page and third-party sites, to validate the information that they're getting from the initial answer from AI. So use it as a tool in the front part of the search process. Allow it to catapult you into further research, but understand that AI is still making mistakes, so-called hallucinations. Understand that it doesn't always have the most valid source data. Like, we're actually at US News starting to advise schools on how they can correct inaccurate data that AIs are often picking up from conflicting information online. So use it as that front gate, but always confirm and validate it with human sources like private consultants who have that deep expertise, as well as those official websites to get to the bottom line.
Okay, so my last question, Kim, is on AI and the essay process, right? I mean, we are tempted to use it. We have even assignments in school. Some of us are using AI. So what is the kind of right approach to this?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the ethical, it's tricky territory ethically. But I think, like Brian kind of alluded to, students are not that comfortable. They kind of know that even if I ask, ChatGPT to write my essay, then they look at it and they're like, this doesn't sound like me. This is not what I would say. It's like if I wrote I've tried to do this for like a student once, and I'll be like, well, this paragraph is confusing. How about if you write it this way? And I give them an example. They're like, I would never say that. I'm like, okay, well then you write it, so it's the same kind of thing. Nobody can take the place of your own voice. So I think that's that's definitely the way that we come at the question when it comes to essays. But I think anyway, that everybody kind of knows that, right? Everybody knows that ChatGPT can write essays. It can do research for you, all the amazing things that it can do. But admissions officers know, if you ask them, are you going to reject students who use AI? They're like, if we suspect AI, we will kind of back away from the essay. But they don't have any way to really know if it's AI or not. And they are not using, as far as what, Brian has talked to them. I've also talked to many admissions officers. They, at this point, are really not using detection tools to understand if students are using AI, because they understand that the detection tools are very, very inaccurate. There's a lot of false positives. It's just not, and it's not a productive use of their time in the evaluation process. And like I said, but all of them said that, if we suspect it, if we suspect AI, then it just means it's not a good essay, which means we're not really interested, right? So it doesn't really have to do with AI. It has to do with, a compelling essay or not. And so I think the answer to your question, this year, I just want to sort of say this, is that this year we've seen so many cases where a student is ready to submit and somehow I've heard of school counselors doing this, I've heard of parents doing this, plugging, the content into the detectors and then coming back in a panic the night that the application's due, that it says that a certain percentage is likely, AI generated. But I think that's really just a huge distraction, and it's very, very stressful. So I don't recommend doing that. And like I said, I don't think you need to do that because these institutions are not doing that. Even the ones that say, like, I think UCAS in the UK says don't use it. Yeah. But even they, the false positives are so high that they would reject like everyone based on that. So, I mean, not everyone, but like such a huge portion of applicants that, it wouldn't even be a good tool is my experience so far. But I think things are really evolving. That is for sure. I think in 5 years, we could be sitting here having this conversation and like everything in the entire application process is super, super automated and students don't even have to do anything. It just like goes from their school to the world, and that could happen.
Until then, there's the red pen. So there we go. Okay, just one question on financial aid, and then we can move into questions that you guys have. So, Kim, for you, if an international student needs financial aid in this current environment, what would you recommend? What would your advice be?
So, my advice to students who need financial aid is always to understand the landscape. And I'm going to just say a few things about it. One of the things is that there's this kind of terminology in the US. Firstly, international students who need aid in other parts of the world, that is not as, it's not as likely that you will get aid, because US universities are actually quite generous with aid and they have a lot of money. So that's where most students we see getting scholarships get them from. Canada has a few, but in terms of those bigger scholarships and scholarships that can make a difference to a student, we see that coming from the US typically. But the terminology is, need aware and need blind. So the idea is that if a college is need aware and they have need aware admissions process, they will evaluate your application, and if you need financial aid and they can't give it to you, they may not admit you. Okay, so that's how need. So a lot of people come and say, well, should I not then ask for aid because I need it? A need blind is the opposite, where, you know, they don't look into that. If they want to admit you, they admit you. And then if you need aid, they either give it to you or they don't. So, you know, I mean, that's just not part of their evaluation process of whether they're going to admit you. So the point, and for international students, there are 7, I think, universities that are need blind for international students and meet full need. Okay, there are many that are need blind for international students and they just don't care where you're getting money, right? Like a lot of public institutions are like that. But if you think of the ones that are need blind, this is like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Amherst, MIT, Dartmouth, Brown, these are all highly selective universities in the first place. So the fact that you have ticked the box that you need financial aid and it's a need blind institution is not really going to weigh into whether you get in or not anyway, because it's so selective, right? So, and I like to say this because we had a student a few years ago who, you know, he was brilliant. He got a full scholarship at MIT, which is need blind, but he also got a full scholarship at Columbia, which is not need blind. So he was just a great student. Universities wanted to admit him, right? So it's not necessarily the case that need blind and need aware is, you know, is kind of limiting that way, in that you won't get a scholarship if you apply to a need aware college. Okay, so I've said that. Now, knowing all of that, then there are merit-based scholarships, and merit-based scholarships are just sort of like, there's a university that has scholarships to give to students they really want to attend, right? You may be brilliant and they don't see students like you very often and you're way above their academic criteria, but they're giving you a scholarship. We just had a student the other day, actually, who put in an early application to Knox College. I feel like there was another one today, but I'm forgetting the college. But anyway, and she got a $50,000 scholarship per year. So that's $200,000 she got by applying early and whatever. And it's not committed. She doesn't have to attend there, but she got this nice scholarship at Knox. She may not go there, but she applied and she has that option. And so that's really what I tell families. It's like, be open-minded. Look at the colleges. You may not, if you need money, you may, you know, end up going there because that has to be your number one criteria, right? I mean, you can get into all kinds of colleges that don't offer you money, but if you need the money, you need to go to the ones that offer you money. So that's the main thing. And I think the final thing I want to say is that do not guess whether you need financial aid. You either need it or you don't need it. It's not it's not optional. Sometimes it's like nice to have. But you know, I also don't suggest that families like really stretch themselves and go way beyond their means, just because they want to get that admit. That's also not a good idea. I mean, there are lots of colleges, like I just said, Knox. I mean, there's so many that will give really, really good scholarships. You can see how much scholarship our students get every year. And many of them do not attend the colleges that give them scholarships, but they have that option, right? So I think I've said enough. If anyone wants to add, scholarships are complicated, and you need to keep a very open mind.
I agree. I mean, we stress with our clients, it's all about maximizing optionality. Ultimately, you don't have to choose to attend that school that gives you that scholarship, but it's great to have in hand and make that comparison as a family. Ultimately, when you have options, you're in the driver's seat. When you don't have options, you're kind of leaving it, you know, only to, you know, you're leaving it to others, right? So do be open-minded to schools that might provide, you know, more generous scholarships to international students, or that might not be those classic prestigious schools like Kim said.
I think I just wanted to add, Kim, I think if you're going to do this, I'll apply to some colleges for aid and some colleges for aid. That game will be played back. We had a student a few years ago that applied to some of the highly selective colleges without aid and then other colleges with aid. And he got a full ride at University of Richmond. He was admitted to Stanford, but they didn't give him any aid. And he didn't ask for it. He didn't ask for it. And he didn't have the money. So he ended up taking the full ride at Richmond. So it's, you know, the universities also see what you're doing and it comes back. So no, thank you so much, Brian, Amy, and Kim for sharing these insightful points today. I think there's so much more to discuss and I think we can go on. I probably have another 10 questions I can ask, but I don't want to do that. I want to open it up to the floor. If there, someone's hand is up. There we go. We can just share a mic. Please feel free to address your question specifically to one of them if you want to.
Sure. Thank you for the wonderful session. Brand, this question's for you. I know you mentioned that the universities are still not incorporating AI too much into their world in terms of evaluation of applications. But the rate of change in AI and the adoption which is happening is very, very, very rapid. We're looking at people taking admission over the next year or two. In that scenario, I would anticipate a lot more universities starting to incorporate AI into the way they're evaluating these applications, especially when you say that there are so many number of applications and each person has barely 6 minutes to kind of review an application, similar to what happens in the industry when you're hiring with resumes. And we're seeing a huge trend in people using the HR managers using AI as a tool. I don't see anything different in the admission process as well. In light of that, what would be your recommendation to folks who are actually applying? What are the factors that they need to consider while they're applying? Because now all of a sudden you don't have a human who's actually evaluating your application. You probably have an AI-based tool which has a lot more intelligence built into it, a lot more data incorporated into it, which is going to make the admission process that much more harder. So how do you see applications, the application process or the application staging, and how does Red Pen help students apply for these?
Yeah, you're right. The pace of change is quite high. And as we shared as an anecdote, that Virginia Tech just announced this summer that they're going to introduce it into that first layer of their essay review process. And I think many other schools will start to adopt it out of necessity, as you're saying, due to the surge in applications that they've received since COVID. Understand that when I'm speaking to these deans, it's not necessarily in their interest to succumb their whole process to AI, because to do so would be to go against the holistic review process that they love to hide their decisions behind, right? If I have a holistic review process, basically what I'm telling you is that, hey, we make our decision based on a bunch of factors and we make that decision on our own. I'm not going to reveal the secret sauce because there is not necessarily secret sauce. Schools are looking to build a balanced, well-rounded class. And what that means is that they're not necessarily looking for every single student to be able to do it all. They're looking for students that will fulfill a particular spot at that university. And so for this reason comes the somewhat arbitrary feeling of, hey, why did I get into Penn but got rejected from UC Berkeley? Why did I get into this school but not get into this one that seems I should have even had a better chance to get into? So I guess what I'm telling you is I really don't anticipate the kind of deeper layer that we've talked about being given over to AI. I still think that the humans that are central to this process, admissions officers, admissions teams, they want to keep their jobs. They have every incentive to keep their jobs, and they want to still have this feeling that, hey, we as an institution have values that we're looking to see reflected in our applicants, and we need to go create this well-rounded class full of individual talents and skills. And that takes a human to be able to make that determination. So I agree with you in that I think there will be lots of new announcements of it being used to help grade the more mechanical, grammatical, verbal aspects of the essay. But they're just doing that so that they can spend more time, evaluating the content through the lens of their unique and holistic review process.
Yeah, I just want to add to that in terms of, as a counselor, what I would sort of recommend. But I just was thinking about it as Brian, I wouldn't change any of my recommendations, actually, because the thing that we're telling students now is that those mechanical pieces, like your transcript, your school report, we tell students all the time, this needs to be clean. It needs to be perfect. It needs to be really, really comprehensible. And that is only going to be more important if your transcript is being evaluated not by a human, right? Because a human can actually look at it and say, this is not making sense. Like, they were in this school and then they had these kind of grades that are on a 100 scale, and then they jump to ABC. Like, I don't understand what's going on. Let me call the counselor, right? So a human might do that. If there's nobody to call the counselor, you might just get spit out, right? Because your transcript isn't clean and your school doesn't really know what it's doing or whatever, something like that. So that's one piece of advice that I anyway give, is that, make everything as easy to understand as possible. And then the second thing is just this whole point about a narrative. I think if anything, the first step that I anticipate is that, and again, this is just my fantasy imagination, that the application will be kind of summarized for a reader. Instead of taking 6 minutes, something will summarize it and give one paragraph or something to an evaluator. And again, if there's no narrative and it's not clear, that summary paragraph is going to be kind of dead. It's going to be, or confusing or whatever. But the more the application itself has threads running through it, dots are connecting, then I'm assuming the more that summary will be something that's attractive and interesting to. And then I think those summaries would then lead to the human being actually looking more deeply at a smaller set of applications, but still thoroughly.
Just one more point, because you mentioned the parallel of employers and ATS systems with resumes, which, as you correctly noted, often will look for the presence of certain keywords to qualify or disqualify applicants. Well, let's take that to its next step. If that were to come to university admissions, which again, I don't think it will for the following reason, then what will students and parents start doing? They'll start to incorporate those same keywords or the same things that they think the system will want to see. Well, then that means there's going to be convergence. That explicitly is not differentiating your application or distinguishing your application if it looks like all others and includes the same things that you think the system wants to see. So again, it all comes back to having that authentic, unique narrative that makes it clear to the admissions officer what you're bringing to this institution. And I don't see there just being like a set of 10 keywords that I need to include in my essay in order for it to pass. Because to do so would explicitly remove those unique aspects of my application and just make it look like everyone else's, which is exactly what we're advising you not to do in the process.
Hey, hi. I have one question. Hi, Pradeep. We spoke that US needs STEM kids, and we understand all AI and all. Then you need brilliant mind and all. But what about the non-STEM kids? So how's the situation right now over there for non-STEM kids, which is 50% of the application in terms of visa, employment, or university seeking more on STEM also, or they're just focusing on the STEM kids? Thank you. It's anyone.
Look, universities understand that international students, whether they're STEM applicants or not STEM applicants, oftentimes are going to have a higher probability of being the full pay, families that they need for the financial lifeblood and the tuition lifeblood of the institution. So, I view this again as a important factor in why universities are so passionately fighting back against the administration, because to not have those extremely important, 5, 10, 15% of my class, which is going to disproportionately be full pay relative to American students who, on average are getting 40, 50% of the tuition covered, would really put my university in a tough spot, especially when universities are dealing with other issues not connected to international admissions, such as the administration threatening research cuts or grant cuts and other funding cuts. So I think those exogenous factors have only made it more important that universities still prioritize international admissions. And again, surveys show this. Surveys of deans across the country show that international admissions remains a top 3 priority. And I think that applies whether it's STEM or non-STEM.
Yeah, does that answer your question about, because I think that was something, I feel like there was a part of your question that was just sort of about what are the opportunities for non-STEM kids, right? So I think, like Brian said, they'll still be admitted, they'll still be, wanted. But I think, as always, there's also, I think it's sort of how it's always been, that a lot of those kids will end up going to a university and finding a STEM major so that they can get their 3-year OPT. So if I'm an economics major, I might, add I might sort of figure out, how to do statistics as a major and something else as a minor. I'm just giving examples. Or psychology, or there's just so many examples, and students can always shift around once they get to college. So that's another sort of feature of the American process. But I think we see, we see international students in non-STEM majors, of course, business and other fields, getting, they're employable. I think they're also in future economies, maybe they're even more desirable because they have like a different kind of perspectives and analytical skills and things. So I don't think in this context or scenario, I don't worry any more about one kind of student or another, personally. Yeah.
I have a question. Sorry. I'll go up.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure?
Yeah,
okay.
go ahead.
Hi.
And then you're next.
Thanks for that. My question is to you, Kim, and Namita, you can add the Indian context. The last around an hour and a half has been really amazing, beautiful discussion. I've taken a lot, but it's also pressure. Like as a parent, and I'm sure the teens are also going through a lot when they are listening to this and like navigating the entire process. What would you recommend that we as parents and teens do to like keep it together, both before the actual application and also after, because there's certain failure rate as well?
Go for it, Kim.
No, I think one thing.
Finished. Two of our kids are in college. Mine are just about to go to college. So I'm starting. I'm like ninth grade, and hers are both in college. So we'll have different perspectives.
Yeah, different perspectives for sure.
Right.
I think one of the things I actually wanted to say this yesterday when I just didn't get time, but I feel like one of the things because yesterday someone asked a question about when do you start, right? How young do you start? And that's always to me like a very touchy question, because it's a very personal thing. It varies kid by kid. I'm not a huge fan of, fifth graders getting involved in thinking about college, etc. However, I do know, and Brian can speak a little about that because he was talking about some of the data that they collect at College Advisor, but I do know that starting earlier, it sounds a lot like pressure. It sounds like, oh my God, my ninth grade kid who just enjoys like swimming and cricket or whatever is going to have to now, start doing psychometric tests to figure out if he wants to be a doctor or an engineer. Okay. So that's not really where we're coming from. I think the main thing about starting early is actually the starting early process really helps diffuse the stress, because you really kind of have an idea where you're going, you know how to get there. You may choose not to go there right now or whatever. I think that first of all, starting early is one of the most important sort of pressure releases, in my opinion. And then the other thing is, I just thought of this student who this kid was one of our very first early students. I think he started maybe around 9th grade, maybe 10th. And his dad was just really insistent, and we were sort of like kind of hesitant. But anyway, we helped him through the process. And actually, in the end, he did not get into sort of like a super duper selective college, but he was completely okay with it because he knew himself by that time. He was like, I've been having these conversations with counselors. I've been understanding where my, strengths lie, and also what I bring to certain situations and where I need to work on things and improve. And I think by the time he went to the college he chose, which is still a very good college, but anyway, he really knew what he was bringing to that experience for himself and for other people. There was not a lot of like self-doubt and, oh my God, I didn't make it and something failed. So I think that really showed me that, starting early is not just about like cracking it. It's also about like getting to build these skills around self-awareness and self-advocacy and just kind of like understanding who you are and where you fit in. So yeah, that's, I guess, what I would say about the pressure. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I think, we're here, even in this panel discussion, everything that we've spoken about, like it's a yardstick of success, like getting into Harvard or getting into this college or that college, or you must have Arduino projects, so you must do this, so you must have APs. And that we say that because we know that those things are needed if you're looking at highly selective college admissions. one of the things that Brian and Amy pointed out was your data, right? The data is the most important thing. And even when US colleges say holistic admissions, if you don't have straight A's or close to straight A's, no matter what you do, you're not going to get your foot in. So as a parent, you need to be realistic, right? Like if I'm sitting with my son in 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade, and we're hovering at like B's, a couple of A's, and some C's, there's no point going down that, let's do this activity and that activity and build this project and let's do this and just put more pressure on the situation. Take a step back and understand what your options are with what you have. And there's tons of them. I think in India, we tend to just be like, no, that's the goal and let's make it happen. But if that's the goal and your kid's getting C's in math in, 8th grade and it's not getting better, adding 5 tuitions isn't going to solve the problem, right? It's changing our mindset. So again, also these highly motivated students, not everyone functions like that, right? Not everyone can play an instrument, do a community project, and get perfect grades. And that's okay. Like, that's really okay. And I think a lot of the work that we do at the Red Pen is just supporting students and families through that, right? And sometimes it's really challenging, I must say, because parents come to us saying, you have the magic wand, like, you do it. It's like, no, that's not how it works. So I think, I think the stress actually happens when your kid has really good grades. Then you're like, oh my God, now I got to do this. And I have to help him think of a project and do this and do that. But really taking a step back and understanding that, data is the most important thing. So let's get that straight first, and then we can think about what else we want to do. And sometimes I've seen like students they're doing like, honestly, like 30 things, right? Like this and this and doing MUN and doing this. And like even this year, for example, my son, he signed up for MUN, but decided to like withdraw last minute because he had 5 other things that he was doing. I'm like, stop. You don't need to do everything. Like, manage your time, do what you do, and do whatever you do and do it properly. So that's just like a perspective that I have, that it's really not a rat race. We make it that. If you just look internally, have discussions as a family, and be okay with the decisions that you take. Brian?
Just one last point. I do agree with Namita's point on like one practical way to reduce the stress for your student is to realize it's not about having 10 extracurriculars and spreading yourself too thin. Admissions officers don't even like that because that doesn't create the cohesive story that leads them to understand what that student's going to bring to the university. We talk about depth over breadth. Let me just bring it back to myself personally, not to make this all about me, but I was that student. Okay. I told you about the high focus that my family placed on education and how I wanted to kind of follow my grandpa's footsteps at Harvard. That was my end all be all. I was obsessed. I would wear my Harvard sweatshirt in sleepless nights, writing essays till 4 a.m. My mom would stay up, with me doing work so that I didn't feel alone. Ultimately, when I got in, I ran across my high school campus and was jumping off the walls. Guess what? That fades really quickly. It's not just about the destination. It really is, I know this is a cliche, it really is about the journey. And it took me a little while to realize that. Certainly I didn't realize it at 17 years old, but later in life, I look back and I now understand that what I was building through those, challenging times was a work ethic, persistence, communication skills, a lot of the soft skills that have served me in life as an entrepreneur and a business person. And so the more that you can understand that you're not just doing this for an admissions result, you're going through this process with a genuine interest in developing your child, or students in the room developing yourself, that gives you that extra motivation, but also helps you just like step back and look at the overall perspective that this is but one point in your life. And that, students who don't go to the quote unquote celebrity institutions become successful all the time, because it's a lot about what you choose to make of that experience. I have friends who have gone to top schools and have had mental breakdowns when they get there, because again, they've built this whole narrative in their head that once I get the result, I'm happy. Once they find out that that's not how life works, then, they can step back and understand that it's a lot more about like, how am I developing myself through this process versus just the result?
Yeah. Sorry, I want to say one more thing, and I'll make it very short. But I think one thing that I've also encountered with a lot of families is, and I think this has to do with the whole board results system, where a student is kind of medium to above average for 9th and and maybe their 10th grade was good. 11th is kind of, and then they get great predicted grades. And then the parents like, oh, now we have to apply to like, the top colleges. And I'm like, but you don't have those grades for 4 years. And that is just, I'm just pointing this out because I think this creates a lot of pressure. Whereas I look at that and I think great predicted grades. I mean, you guys, in international schools really run on this whole predicted grade system, and great predicted grades, and that's good. That means your student is improving, and when they get to college, they will probably do well, considering the rigor of the curriculum. But it doesn't mean that they're now prepared. I mean, they're now somehow super eligible for those colleges. So, and then you miss out on the colleges that they might be eligible for. So I think that's something else to really keep in mind, is that it is not in this US admissions process specifically, and UK is different. So you cannot just look at that, predicted grade and the growth trajectory. It has to be there all the 4 years for the very, very top colleges. So that's one thing I just want to say. And like, I just wanted to highlight that because I think defocusing on the predicted or the final will also reduce stress. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Did you wait long enough?
Thank you guys for doing this. Answered a lot of questions that I had. I have a 13-year-old son. He's a national level chess player. He's been doing chess for the last 10 years, practices a couple hours a day, takes part in tournaments every weekend. So most of my Sundays are not at home. It's with an iPad outside a tournament. Is chess, like, he's really good at chess. He's really good at MUN, right? So he did his first MUN, came second in the country. So that was kind of interesting. We didn't realize that he had that in him. Are these two things enough? Because he's like, no, I think I should just double down on chess and just keep, increasing my rating. I'm like, hey, you may want to slow that down, because I don't think just being, a IM or GM in chess is going to, help in the longer run. You're not going to become a chess coach. You're not going to be doing chess for a living. I've been kind of pushing him towards maybe doing a podcast where he's interviewing chess players, or he's doing something in the community where he's teaching elderly people chess and maybe using that as a bonding activity, maybe keeping. So I just wanted your thoughts on, am I pushing him the right direction, or should he just like go full guns and just on chess and one? It's fine.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. First of all, wow. But yeah, and we were having conversations similar to this before, with students. Part of that, that holistic review and wanting that well-rounded student is, yes, to see things that they are committed to over time and that they're progressively getting better, but then also not being so narrowly focused that it's just like one or two things. They want to see, and I think your advice, quite frankly, of how can he take his expertise and his experience in those areas and give that back in some way and help others to start to achieve that or benefit from that. So I think, unless anybody agrees, I think you're spot on with that advice. Now, your dad, so I don't know if he'll listen to you, but there's certainly professionals that can help get that word across as well. But no, I would agree. I would try to diversify that a little bit. But again, he clearly has a talent and a passion, and however he can accelerate that or expand upon that, great. But I think there's opportunities to make that even more.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I wanted to do that is I run a few businesses, but I also do a podcast. I also do a bunch of other things. And I was actually pushing him into this, not because just university admissions. I think he'll just get more out of this whole experience. Like just even doing a podcast, you're interviewing people.
Felt like that.
Yeah.
So that's the right way to think about it.
I think like what it comes down to, and the advice you're giving to him is quite sound. Make sure he can maintain the edge that does come with having that. We were all wowed when you were talking about his achievements, right? So that's going to be an edge in his application. That's going to be a vertex of his narrative, but it's but one vertex, right? He needs to be able to connect that to other academic interests, other passions. He needs to be able to still effectively communicate, right? Like the worst thing that could happen is he spends all his time playing chess and then he goes to an admissions interview and, can't connect at all or can't speak about himself effectively in the essay writing process. So, retain that edge, but connect it to other vertices of his narrative.
Okay, so we'll do one more question, and then the four of us are available for you to talk.
Actually,
to us.
2 questions, 2 microphones in hand.
Okay, so we'll do 2, and then like I said,
Gosh,
four
there's
of us.
3. Oh my God.
Four of us are available to talk. So okay, go.
Thank
for
you.
it.
Thank you. Parents and students, one thing they were most worried about was getting an admissions offer
But now there is one more thing they are worried about after getting an admission offer is the F1 visas. So, Brian, you have talked about the trends, about the drop in the applications that you have seen in the last year. Do you have data about the rejections? Because there have been stories about the F1s getting rejected. So, do you have any data points about the trends of, if it is true that there is an increase in the rejections of F1s? And Kim and Namita, in particular, what are the trends that you see for the Red Pen students that you are counseling?
I think you have some data on this, right?
Well,
Some anecdotes.
yeah, I mean, I think like one new thing that has happened, especially as a result of some of the political, on the ground protesting and things like that, the administration is caring a lot about, is that they're now doing these like social media checks. That's something to be aware of in the F1 visa granting process. I know, Kim, you have that an example of a student getting rejected in one area, trying to apply for it in another. But ultimately, the delays at consulates we're starting to see go down. I think as long as like your student isn't posting controversial things on social media every day, like that's not going to really block them from getting the visa. And ultimately, F1 visa grantees from India, I think, represent 31% of all F1 visas. And again, are so like those F1 visas are so critical to the talent and tuition gaps in the United States that I think that it's going to be hard to it's going to be hard to convince universities that they should suddenly stop prioritizing international students.
I think I don't. What we know is that F1 visa refusal rates went up in this past cycle, but majority of those were for postgrad, for graduate students. We did not see much refusal. I mean, I have heard of one case. It wasn't a Red Pen student, but I've heard of one, and I think that student went and on the second try got their visa. And in fact, we had a few students, and this is every year, who fail to get their visa in the first interview, and then they go again and they get it. But that was obviously super hard this time because getting a second appointment was like. So I think people were going to Singapore and Dubai and things like that, which then they disallowed. But assuming that appointments are available, I think the visa refusal rate will still be much higher among graduate students than undergrads. And that's pretty much all I know. Yeah. Okay, I think...
Can I go ahead?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead. We should...
Okay. Hi. So my question, I think, is specifically for you, Amy. Yes. So he had mentioned something about we prefer depth in the application over, spreading yourself thin across a lot of things. Now, most of our kids want to do those 10 different things, in extracurriculars, and somehow in your essay, you want to touch upon everything somewhere, kind of hint. So my question is, what would you advise? Because you've been reading a lot of applications. So you touch upon 2 to 3 main things and how they impacted you, or you just touch upon that one thing which kind of really inspired you to apply there, or which really made a change in your life. So what is like the ideal combination that works for you?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's a frustrating thing, but also I think it's a benefit to the way that, American colleges operate is they each allow students different ways to express all of those things. And so, yes, through the common application, you're going to write a personal statement. You have to pick one of 6 different prompts. But again, that's options, right? You're not limited to just one thing. You can pick one of these 6 things that might speak to you that will go to all the colleges you apply to in the Common App. But then all the other institutions that you select on the Common App are also going to ask essay questions. And they'll range in terms of word limits or word counts and character counts and things like that. And some of them allow you to get really creative. Some of them allow you to just speak about things that otherwise you would never find out about the student in the application. So, I bring that up first to say that, if the student does have a lot of varied interests and they're doing a lot of things, they cannot put more than 10 on the common application anyway. That's right, 10. Okay, I was like, I just did that. Okay, I was like, I want to make sure. They can only put 10 on there, right? And there's a certain character count, or word limit to what they can do to describe it. So those essays, those supplemental essays, are the way that they can go deeper into either the same things they've listed, or they can also tie in things that maybe they weren't able to list on there or have, more of that experience with outside, that might be on the peripheral of those things. But again, there is importance in connecting them, because the reader is not going to understand if they're seeing, 5 or 6 things are all related, and then there's this outlier over here that doesn't make sense. The student has to connect it for them. So, it really isn't about the quantity, it's about the quality. But certainly if there is more quantity, it's just pulling it together and making it cohesive and kind of helping them understand that narrative that makes up that student's experience. Does that answer your question?
I'll just clarify, like the prior phrase I used, I'll add to it. So it's depth over breadth, but not at the risk of being too narrowly defined. And that actually goes back to our answer to the prior gentleman, right? The depth is important because you need to be able to demonstrate that edge, those achievements. You need to have firepower to be able to capture the interest of the admissions officer. But if you're only doing one thing, and then I'm writing about it in my personal statement, it's the only, 1 or 2 things on my extracurricular list, I'm writing about it on my supplemental essays, I start to feel like a one-trick pony. So you need to have some ammo for these different aspects of the application. That doesn't mean you need to have, 10 things that you're equally spreading your time. The other thing I'll cite is that, and this actually came out in the SFFA lawsuit where, Harvard and UNC Chapel Hill were sued a few years ago, and a lot of data was revealed about how admissions officers use a scoring system for the extracurriculars. And it showed that some of the factors that they consider are the number of years and the progression, right? So if I'm doing too many things, then do I have the opportunity to, become the leader of this organization or, make those achievements in that particular way? So again, it's a balancing act, but depth over breadth, but don't overly narrow, don't over narrowly define yourself.
Okay, last question.
Yeah, and then
She's been waiting very long.
Thank you so much for a really insightful session. I just wanted some guidance on someone who's interested in engineering but not in computer engineering. So some guidance on what are the other good options available.
In engineering? Well, gosh, I mean, what are they outside of computer engineering? I mean, there's a lot of engineering. What are you interested in? Yeah, do you want me to list them out?
Engineering, biomedical engineering.
Yeah, environmental engineering, civil engineering, industrial engineering.
In any of these engineering disciplines, there's an extreme importance still in having those technical skills that can be derived from learning coding languages and applying those, right? I mean, even if I'm going and studying raw physics, I'm going to be leveraging and learning how to code in order to run my projects or simulate my, simulate and analyze data. So the computer science and core skills are still important to develop, but I'm probably thinking about, are there other subjects that your student is gravitating toward? If they just, absolutely love obsessing over molecular composition, maybe considering, biomedical engineering as an example. So, and there's a number of new fields, right, that are going to be the fields of the future, like robotics, that are going to need lots of engineers across mechanical as well as computer.
I also want to just point out that, and this goes back to Brian's point about rankings. U.S. News has this interesting ranking. It's called Best Engineering Schools that do not offer PhDs. So what that means is that these are undergraduate only engineering colleges. The only students on those campuses learning engineering directly from the faculty are undergraduates. And those colleges are the colleges like Harvey Mudd, Olin College, and others that I'm just don't know how on the top of my head, but Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. But the point about that is that students work directly with faculty, and usually the engineering program is general. You do not specialize in any field or branch of engineering, except maybe later, like maybe in your final years. But in the beginning, you're generally studying engineering, and those colleges offer great engineering experience, education, and also connection to not just the faculty directly. Because if you're at, say, even at UCLA, let's just take, there's a whole layer of PhD students between you and the faculty. You're not you'll get access to the faculty eventually, but there's just a lot of people in the departments, and they're very specialized. So these sort of broader, more kind of liberal engineering programs may be good for a student like that. And India also has Plaksha University, which is similar. It's a liberal arts engineering university, which has just come up in the last couple of years, which is doing great. So there are a lot of options for undecided engineers.
Okay, really last question.
Okay, really last question.
And we're here, so you can come up and talk to us.
I'm in the 11th grade, so obviously the entire process of applying to colleges is very daunting and intimidating. But I spoke to a lot of my teachers and my school counselor, and I'm extremely confused on whether to go in directly for like my specific branched out course or taking a pure science and then branching on my second year or third year. So like, is there something that's easier or there are more options, take a pure science, or what does that look like?
What do you mean by branching? Sorry,
So like what I would like to apply for example, pharmacology.
Aha. Okay,
So would you rather take a pure science like a bio or a chem and then branch out into pharmacology later, or would you just go directly into pharmacology?
I mean, I'll just give you a short answer, which is I think pharmacology is too specialized at this level. So I would say go broader first. Any other advice?
I agree.
I agree. I mean, ultimately, you're likely going to do graduate school to pursue a career like that anyway. So, thinking about kind of the value of that broad-based education, understand that you can, and a lot of students do switch majors when they get to school. Talked a little bit about this earlier, but, certain majors at particular universities are harder to get into than others. So, that's something that we at, the Red Pen and College Advisor have lots of data on and can help, you make that determination on a school-by-school basis. Happy to talk to you more about
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say talk to us because there's so many, like I mentioned Northwestern, for example. You can go do, I don't know, bio or something there. And then there's so many interdisciplinary projects you can get involved with and just things happening on campus where you can actually extend your interest into many different areas and just stick with bio, but you still get all that experience in something else, right? So there's lots of things out there. Let's just leave it at that. So I hope you guys all got a lot out of this session.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all so much
for joining us. We really appreciate everyone coming.